Hello and welcome back to another video. Today going to be talking about whether classics are going to return for Test Drive Unlimited Solar Crown. So it's been a little while since I've done one of these kind of wish list discussion style videos, but you guys usually seem to enjoy them, and I do quite like making them. They do just take a little bit longer than the usual style videos, so it's not always possible, but yeah, always enjoy making these, so thought I'd make one on the topic of classics returning to Test Drive Unlimited Solar Crown. Are they going to return? What do you guys think? So far, the oldest car we've seen in the trailers themselves has been a pre-facelift Lamborghini Diablo, which means the oldest that could be is 1990. They were built between 90 and 98, so not the oldest classic, but the only one we've seen in a trailer so far. We don't know if it's a base model, a VT, or an SV, but that's kind of the basis for this video. That's the only one we've seen so far, so I wanted to kind of talk about whether that's going to be the only one, whether we could potentially see some more, and just kind of talk through what I think, which classics I would like to see in the game. So, of course, Test Drive Unlimited has always had its own kind of feeling, its own lifestyle vibe, all about experiencing that lifestyle of the richest 1% with its houses, its super exclusive and very expensive limited edition cars, and in the past, super valuable and rare classics are part of that collection of, well, rather expensive cars that the aim of the game is kind of to collect. So far, we've actually seen a couple of classics. I know I said at the beginning it's just the Diablo, because that's the only one we've seen in a trailer itself, which means it's kind of confirmed as we've seen it in there. So it's the only one that's kind of confirmed as coming to the game. Whereas there's another one that was spotted that wasn't actually within a trailer itself. There was an E-Type Lightweight shown in the background of an interview during the Nakon Connect stream, which was basically shot in a dealership, and there was this Jaguar sitting there behind them. So it could just be an entire coincidence, but before Test Drive Unlimited 2 came out, they shot some cars in a dealership, most of which ended up being in the game. So things like that are often placed on purpose. Like I say, might just be a coincidence, but there's a very strong possibility that will be in the game too. So, now that I've taken a look at the cars spotted in some of the promotional stuff so far that we've seen for Test Drive Unlimited Solar Crown, with the car shown in the trailer and shown in the background, let's get on to some of the classics seen in the previous games, starting with a list of cars that have been seen in both previous TDUs, Test Drive Unlimited, of course the first one, and Test Drive Unlimited 2. These cars have reappeared through both games. So, we have the 1966 AC Cobra 427, the 1957 Chevrolet Corvette C1, the 1971 Ferrari Dino 246 GTS, the 1962 Ferrari 250 GTO, the 1982 Ferrari 308 GTS, the 1987 Ferrari F40, the 1961 Jaguar E-Type Coupe, the 1957 Mercedes-Benz 300 SL, and the 1963 Shelby Cobra Daytona. So, as these were seen in both previous games, to me they seem like the most obvious choices to carry forward. They obviously already carried them forward from 1 to 2, so why not carry them forward to the third game? Give a bit of a throwback to those old games. It's the kind of thing developers like to do, and it would just kind of, I don't know, for those of us that played the first two games, it would be really nice to see the same classics, because we all have fond memories of driving those in the game, and they were the sort of, a lot of them, the exclusive cars that were hard to get hold of. But yeah, kind of makes sense to add these as they already were in the previous two, but I know that's not necessarily how it works. It's been a long time since the previous two games, so not necessarily going to happen. There are also in that list a kind of disproportionate number of Ferraris. Apart from that, there is quite a nice variety, but I don't necessarily expect to see that huge a proportion of the classics in there all be from one brand. So those were the most likely ones to see, the ones that were in both previous games, but now I'm going to run through some of my favourites that were seen in just one of the previous games. Not going to go through the whole list because there's quite a lot of them, particularly Test Drive Unlimited 1 had quite a high number of classics in it, so I'm just going to pick and choose my favourites, although that's ended up being quite a long list in itself. So, Let's start with the 1965 Citroen 2CV, which, yes, seems like a bit of an odd choice. It was one of the rec cars you have to find in TDU2, so it's a fun and quirky little thing compared to most other cars. Slower, can be a lot of fun. Driving slow cars on their limits in these games is always quite a fun little thing to do. But yeah, things like that are just fun to mess about with, aren't they? And as it was in TDU2, it would be nice to see that return. There's also, I would like to see the 1971 Dodge Charger and the 1969 Dodge Challenger, both of which I think were also wrecks in TDU2, but something a bit different, some muscle cars in there would be nice to see amongst the other stuff. The 1984 Ferrari 288 GTO. Yes, I know I already said there's too many Ferraris, but personally I find this, well, I think this is a more important Ferrari than the F40. Please don't shout at me. I've always preferred it, and it was kind of the car that came before the F40. F40 wouldn't have existed without this, so I kind of feel like that deserves a place, even if maybe one of the others gets taken out. Anyway. Next on my list is the 1968 Ford Mustang Fastback, which is of course one of the starter cars from TDU2, so that's why I'd quite like to see that return. The 1993 Jaguar XJ220, it's an XJ220, it's an iconic classic, it kind of needs to be in there. The 1971 Lamborghini Miura SV, we already kind of know we're getting a Diablo of some sort, so another classic Lamborghini, would make sense for that to return and sit alongside it. 1992 Lancia Delta Integrale, again another TDU2 starter car, so that's why that's on the list. 1975 Lancia Stratos, another wreck, I believe, in TDU2, and if you've got a Delta, you kind of can't miss out the Stratos. It's an even more important, even more iconic Lancia than that. The 1993 McLaren F1, I've opted for the base model. I know several different McLaren F1s were seen in TDU1, but the base model's the most iconic, it's the original, that's the one I think should really be in there if they're going to put any in. And finally the 1975 VW Beetle, which was another TDU2 wreck. Same as the 2CV, that's kind of the reason I want to see the Beetle in there as well. And those are the cars I'd like to see return from, well, cars that were in one of the previous TDU games that I'd like to see return. So, now that I've quickly gone over cars that I'd like to return and the classics that we kind of know might be coming, let's go on to some new classics for the Test Drive Unlimited series, which haven't been in the previous two games. Starting with quite an obvious one, the Aston Martin DB5. No explanation really needed for that. Same with the next one, the DeLorean. Don't really need an explanation, that's iconic enough to feature, I think. The third one is quite specific, the Jaguar E-Type S1 convertible, so yes, very specific, but I've always loved the convertible where I don't really like the looks of the coupe with the E-Type, and the S1, the Series 1, I think is the most iconic, and as far as I know, the only sort of new game that the convertible E-Type is in is The Crew 2, which I absolutely love seeing in there. Obviously we had the coupe in the first two test drives, but I think the Series 1 convertible's kind of more appropriate. And then you have the convertible roof option thing, which has been a, well, it's inspired Forza now, but was always the sort of test drives, one of test drive's unique features. But next up, it's kind of not quite a classic, a modern classic. I think this is about as new as you could go, really. The Koenigsegg CC8, which I think we did have some early Koenigsegg's in the first test drive, but they were new at that point, it wasn't counted as a classic. So a very early CC8 from as early as 2002 would be cool to see. Next up, Lamborghini Countach to sit between the Miura and the Diablo, obviously. The Miura I mentioned earlier and the Diablo we've kind of already had confirmed, so the Countach to sit in the middle would make sense if you're collecting classic Lamborghinis, which is something I can imagine you'd do in a test drive game. Next up, a classic Mini, which I don't think we've had in the previous ones at all somehow. We had the 2CV and the Beetle in TDU2 as wrecks, but a Mini alongside, potentially again as a wreck alongside those two, would be pretty cool if wrecks are returning. But yeah, a classic Mini I think deserves a place alongside the Beetle and 2CV. Next up, a bit older than a classic, a vintage car, the 1904 Rolls-Royce 10 horsepower, so essentially the first Rolls-Royce. And the only reason I'm putting that in is because it's the most expensive vintage car to have ever sold at auction, so the most expensive car from before 1930. I would also put in the most expensive classic, but that's a 250 GTO. Or it might be a different 250, but we already have the 250 GTO in the list, so that can't be added. But the Rolls-Royce to go alongside that, so you've got the most valuable vintage car and the most valuable classic car alongside each other in the garage, I think would be a kind of cool feature, because expensive cars, like I said, fit the lifestyle theme of Test Drive, and Rolls-Royce, most expensive Rolls-Royce ever to sell. I think those two things mean it fits really, really well with the Test Drive vibe. Next up, similar to the Koenigsegg, the original Zonda. I know we had early Zondas in Test Drive Unlimited 1, I think, but a really early one, a 1999, I think was the first model year, would be nice to see alongside that early Koenigsegg. Even if they are returning, they would be new in the classic category, if you like, because they would have been new cars before. And finally, something a bit fun like the Mini, a VW bus, again to go alongside the Beetle. Really, again, this could potentially be another rec vehicle if that feature is returning for Test Drive Unlimited Solar Crown. So there we go. Those are the classics I'd like to see return for Test Drive Unlimited Solar Crown, as well as a couple that, well, one that's confirmed, one that we will potentially see, some of the cars that I think are most likely to return that have been in both previous games, as well as, like I said, a wish list of cars from just one previous game that I'd like to see return, and some new cars that I'd like to see added. Now, as always, when I talk about the cars I want to see return and that I want to see added, I don't expect them all to be added. I don't expect anywhere near that many classics in the game, at launch at least, and those are just the ones I'd like to see. So even if it is just one or two that are added out of that list, I would be super, super happy. Those are just the ones I would most like to see, not necessarily I want to see all of them. We know it's not necessarily always possible to add certain cars, and yeah, we don't necessarily expect a huge number. The previous two Test Drive games didn't actually have huge car lists in comparison to modern games, at least. So yeah, just expect a nice selection maybe of some of the cars that were on that. We don't even know if there will be any other classics, apart from the Diablo that we already saw in a trailer. But I would find it rather odd if there weren't. Only having one older car in the game on its own doesn't really make sense. And like I said, classics are kind of needed to fully immerse you in that exclusive car collecting lifestyle that TDU games have always promised. So I kind of think they do need to be in there. But what do you think? Do you think classics should be in there? Do you think they will return? If you do, which ones would you like to see? Do you agree with my suggestions, or are there any others that you would like to add to that list? Do let me know in the comments, and also do let me know if you've enjoyed this video, because there are plenty more similar discussion video topics similar to this that I want to make and that I have plans to make. So if you did enjoy it, I'll be sure to make some of those soon. So anyway, that's going to be all for now. As always, I look forward to hearing more TDU Solar Crown information as and when it comes out. But for now, for today's video, that is going to be all. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll be back with the next video very soon.